The Echo of Justice, The Detective's Curse. On a cold, rainy night in 1980, Detective Michael Harris was called to a crime scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The location, a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. The date, December 14th. The time, 11:30 p.m. Inside the house, the body of a man in his late 70s was discovered. The scene was eerily quiet, the only sound being the steady drip of rainwater seeping through a cracked window. The man had been stabbed once in the chest, a clean, precise wound that suggested the killer knew exactly what they were doing. But what disturbed Harris the most was the word written on the dusty mirror in the bedroom: justice. The investigation was thorough, but nothing seemed to make sense. The victim, a loner with no known enemies, had no connections that could explain such a brutal killing. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no apparent motive. Despite his best efforts, Harris never solved the case. It became the one that got away, a dark shadow hanging over his career. 20 years later, on the same cold December night, another murder occurred. The location, the date, and even the time were identical. This time, the victim was an elderly man in his late 80s, but what struck Detective Sarah Mitchell as chilling was the identity of the victim, Michael Harris, the very detective who had investigated the 1980 case. As Mitchell stood in the same dilapidated house, now even more decayed with time, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The scene was an exact replica of the 1980 murder. The same single stab wound, the same eerie silence, and once again, the word justice scrawled on the mirror. Mitchell knew this was no ordinary case. The more she dug into the past, the more she uncovered a terrifying pattern. Every 20 years, dating back to 1920, a murder had taken place at the exact same location, on the same date, at the same time. And every victim, except the first, had been the detective who investigated the previous case. Determined to break the cycle, Mitchell delved deep into the records, unearthing the details of the original 1920 murder. The victim, a young man named Thomas Wilcox, had been found dead in the very same house, killed in the same manner. The investigation at the time had pointed to a possible suspect, Wilcox's girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, a man named Harold Bennett. But Bennett had never been convicted, and the case remained unsolved. Mitchell tracked down Bennett, now 100 years old and living in a nursing home. Frail and near the end of his life, Bennett initially refused to speak of the past. But as Mitchell pressed him, he finally confessed. Yes, he had killed Thomas Wilcox out of jealousy and rage. But he swore he had no idea why the murders continued, or why the detectives kept dying. "I was young and foolish," Bennett whispered, his voice trembling. "But I swear, I don't know why this keeps happening." The next day, Mitchell received a call that sent a chill through her. Harold Bennett had died in his sleep, at precisely 11:30 p.m. When his nurse entered the room, she found the same word, justice, written on the mirror. Mitchell was left with more questions than answers. The original crime had been solved, but the mystery of the repeating murders remained unsolved. As she stood in the room where Bennett had died, she realized that some forces were beyond her understanding. The cycle had ended with Bennett's death, but the word on the mirror seemed to be a final declaration, as if justice had finally been served. Years later, Mitchell would often think back to the case, wondering if she had missed something, if there was a hidden truth that had eluded her. But deep down, she knew that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, locked away in the echoes of time. And in that small, dilapidated house, the word justice faded away, leaving behind only the lingering memory of a century-old secret. Join us in the shadows, like and subscribe for more.